If you've ever seen my video, Light Novel Trends Can't Possibly Be This Interesting, that I made like 2 years ago, then you've probably heard me talk a lot about this old school style of light novel. And I've brought this up in a few videos over the years. I keep kind of making reference to this idea that there was a time when light novels were largely these dark urban fantasies that were really trippy and strange, and I often make reference to them as part of Faust. So I'm going to just explain what the hell Faust is in one simple video so that when people will get what I'm referencing when I talk about that. So this is Faust as it was published in America, or in English. I don't know how many countries it was published in, but kind of a rare two-book collection here. But this was originally, Faust was a novel and manga magazine in Japan. Similar to something like a Shonen Jump or any of those other magazines that have, like, one cohesive theme. This one was themed around light novels that were dark urban fantasies and like really trippy weird stories, as well as manga snippets of the same nature. And if you read through these books that they published in English, they really try to create a sense of what Faust was. There's lots of interviews with the people, like the publishers or the producer, I don't know what you would call it, the guy who ran the thing. There's interviews with all the authors and stuff like that. There's just lots of commentary on like what Faust was and what it was trying to be, because it was a pretty short-lived magazine. It was like I think it was a quarterly publication, and it only lasted like 3 or 4 years. They had a couple of Faust box releases, which were like a bigger one, but it didn't last very long. I don't know that it was super successful or anything. But the people who were putting it together clearly had a lot of passion for it, and when they brought it to the U.S., they really wanted to like sell the idea of this grandiose thing they were trying to accomplish with this. Fiction and manga from the cutting edge of Japanese culture, as it calls itself. Now, if you look at this cover art, you may recognize the art style, because it's Take, who was the artist of Katanagatari and Zaregoto, both by Nisio Isin. And, these two volumes were released at a time before Bakemonogatari's anime started. Nisio Isin had no anime adaptations at the time. They were trying to sell this on the strength of the fact that you see how Clamp is the very first name on there? Clamp has nothing to do with this book, really, except that Nisio Isin wrote a novelization of XXX Holic. So the first chapter of that book is in here, of Nisio Isin's adaptation of XXX Holic. But otherwise, Clamp's not involved. But Clamp at the time was the most important name. It was the most sellable name in this whole book, whereas Nisio Isin was pretty much unheard of at the time. So these books did not sell, and they disappeared quickly. The American ones, I mean. They're hard to come by. I'm sure you could probably find them on Amazon through some seller. But they're not the easiest to find things, which is why it's hard for me to just recommend these to people and be like, go read Faust, because good luck finding it. But these had, here, I'll just go through. This first book has a Nisio Isin story in it. Then it's got a story by Kohei Kodono, who did Boogie Pop. It's got a story by one Otaro Maijo, who's a fucking crazy person. Otsuichi, who did Goth, which some of you may have heard of. Kinoko Nasu, it's got the first chapter of Kata no Kyokai in here. The Kata no Kyokai films had just started coming out in Japan at the time this was released. No one cared about them. No one had heard of them. No one had seen them. So not helpful to this book. Then there's some like really weird shorts. There's a counseling session is like a regular thing they would do in each issue of the original magazine, where it'd just be like a few pages of like answering fan questions, but in a really esoteric way, done by Tatsuhiko Takimoto, who did Welcome to the NHK. And then you've got some manga stuff in the back. So there's a manga by Take in full color that's in here. Take being, of course, the artist on the cover, as I mentioned before. Then a comic by Vofan, the person who did the artwork for the Bakemonogatari light novels. So yeah, like again, Bakemonogatari was completely unheard of in the U.S. at the time of this coming out, or else it might have been something they advertised a little more. Here's another, just like very gorgeous digital art from a time when digital art in itself was impressive just because it like existed. And then there's also this this manga in here that's written by Nisio Isin and drawn by Yoon Koga, who did Loveless. This is when I said that Nisio Isin is obsessed with genius and that he had some short manga exploring the concept. This is what I was referring to. This is a whole manga about like a super genius who they've trapped in like the ultimate prison, but she knows how to get out of it because she's that much of a genius. So yeah, that's what's in here. Now, relating to that, so a lot of those light novels did come out, that these authors wrote, did come out in the U.S. around this time, but none of them were very successful. Welcome to the NHK novelization came out in the U.S. Don't know if a lot of people read that. The anime is fairly popular, but I almost never hear anyone talk about the novel, which is better than the anime. Zaregoto, again, Nisio Isin was not known in the U.S. These did not sell. They only released 2. And the publisher behind both Zaregoto and the Faust volumes was Del Rey, who completely, blew, they're just not a thing anymore. They're now Kodansha Comics, which is, the parent company of, them from Japan, I guess, just probably took over. So, yeah, they only ever released 2 books of Zaregoto. I think this might be getting republished by Vertical, because Vertical has now been releasing the Monogatari series. Bake and Kizu are both out in the U.S., and I think they intend on doing Zaregoto because now obviously Nisio Isin's a much bigger deal, so they can get away with that. Ryogo Narita, who wrote Bakano, this book took 10 fucking years to get stateside, just finally came out last year because Bakano was not very popular when it first started. Much more popular was Durarara, and even that took a long time for the light novels to get here because, again, light novels in the late 2000s were just not fucking selling. They were not a big deal. No one cared about them, which is why we never got more of Boogie Pop. Boogie Pop was my favorite book when I was a teenager. They released the first 3 and then skipped ahead to book 5 or 6, which is the prequel. And they released it in this really tiny form for some reason. Doesn't match the others. But yeah, Seven Seas was really trying to push light novels at the time, but they failed. They gave up. They stopped trying. And only recently did light novels become a thing again. And I think it's mostly because of Dengeki Bunko, the guys who, published Durarara and all the bullshit, Sword Art Online, fucking Shakugan no Shan. Everything that's in the Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax game is them. Irregular at Magic High School, Certain Magical Index, Pretty much all the main Dengeki Bunko line stories started getting released in the U.S. After Sword Art Online became super popular. And I think that drew a lot of attention back to light novels. And of course now everybody knows what light novels are. No one knew in the late 2000s what light novels were. So that's why they're kind of making a comeback and why we can start getting things like the Monogatari series and Zaregoto coming back. One that probably no one's heard of, Otaro Maijo, who has this book Asura Girl. I am not that far into it, but it's fucking crazy. Otaro Maijo is the most unhinged, batshit insane of all these authors. He has a story in this book called Drill Hole in My Brain, which is just about a very angry kid who drills a hole in his brain and then goes on a fucking psychedelic madness exploration. His stuff's fucking insane, and he recently wrote for anime for the first time because he did the Dragon Dentist short, which was the first of the Studio Kara Animator Expo shorts, which is getting its own TV show at some point. So I don't know if he's going to write the whole show, but maybe people will finally find out about Otaro Maijo. He's fucking insane, and his book Asura Girl is available in the US. So you've got Volume 2 of Faust, which is a lot of the same kind of stuff. This one has Okay, I'll just go through once again. It's got notice the first name on the front is Takeshi Obata, which is I believe the Takeshi Obata. Yeah, Takeshi Obata being the artist of Death Note. So he was the most notable person to put on the cover this time. This one's got a Nisio Isin story called Magical Girl Risuka, a Kohei Kodono story, that's Boogie Pop Guy again, called Jagged Tiger, an Otsuichi story called Where the Wind Blows. I don't have any of Otsuichi's books. I have the manga of Goth, but there was also a book. He wrote Zoo and a couple of other things. He was a pretty he was a little bit more normal than most of the other Faust guys, but he wrote like sort of young adult horror stories for the most part. Gray Colored Diet Coke by Yuya Sato. Yuya Sato is like a hack who is like the shitty version of all these other authors. Tatsuhiko Takimoto does a story called Echo. Again, some weird little shorts. Another Takimoto counseling session. That's, again, Takimoto being the guy who did NHK. This one. And then some like again, translation notes, explanations of what the hell this book is. And then on the back end, you've got more manga. This one did not have any full color pages. I assume because it was probably expensive the first time and they didn't want to try again or something. Because these are obviously, they look like they should be in full color. We've got Vofan, once again, the Monogatari series artist. This one actually has a bit by Katsuhiro Otomo, the artist of Akira, but it's just his drawings of old dudes. He just, like, observed old dudes and drew them in their natural habitat, which is hilarious. And then we've also got a short manga by Ueda Hajime, who is one of my favorite artists. He did the Fulikuli manga, as well as the Monogatari series end cards, or the ending themes, rather. Like, all that, you know, super sketchy art that's in the Monogatari series endings is all by him. And I fucking love those endings. I love his art style. And, yeah, like, when I first saw the Monogatari, like, the Bakemonogatari anime, I was like, oh my god, this is all the Faust guys, you know? It's a Nisio Isin adaptation. Ueda Hajime is in the fucking ending theme, you know, and Shinbo's the perfect person to be adapting that stuff. Where even is Takeshi Obata in this? Did he draw something, or... He's the artist, right? Yeah, Tsugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata did Death Note. So where the hell is... Okay, there we go. He drew images for the Otsuichi story. So, yeah, like, that's the extent to which... Like, he just basically did some incredibly simple art for this story that's, like, barely even there. But because he's, you know, he's the author of Death Note, he's top billing because none of these people mattered at the time, in the US at least. So that's why these just did not sell at all, and nobody cared. But it's such a shame because if these came out now, people would probably give much more of a fuck. Nisio Isin's a big name. You know, Take would draw some attention because people know Katana Gatari, and now, you know, Kubikiri Cycle's getting adapted to anime. Fucking, you know, it's a real shame that Boogie Pop's never taken off here because there's never been a really solid adaptation of it. You know, Boogie Pop Phantom is not even really an adaptation of the novels. It takes place in between the first two and has little to do with the actual story of Boogie Pop. So it's a real shame that these guys are probably never going to take off here unless they make another anime adaptation. But anyway, that's what Faust is. That's why I refer to the Faust-style light novels to old-school urban fantasies. They're all basically like that. If you enjoy any of those stories, like if you've heard of any of these and read any of them, you should check out the rest. They're all very similar styles of author, you know. Some of them are a little bit more grounded in reality and a little bit more about, like, the depressing life of being a shut-in otaku NEET. Some of them are a little bit more fantastical and out there, but they're all very similar in tone. So, Yeah, I highly recommend. If you can find those Faust volumes, you should absolutely check them out. They're really, even if you don't like the individual stories that much, I think these are it's so interesting as a portrait of like a time and place thing that like that this magazine existed and all these authors sort of worked together and knew each other, and you know that they clearly tried to make something out of this. Whether or not it succeeded, it did not. But it's interesting to read about. I haven't even finished these actually. I haven't read all the stories in these, so maybe one day I'll get around to that myself.